Welcome to the One Deeper podcast, where you and I try to learn something new about the world. My guest this episode is Dr. Emmanuel Keuleers. Dr. Keuleers is an associate professor in the Department of Cognitive Science and Artificial Intelligence at Tilburg University. He's also the academic director of the CSAI program. His research focuses on, to put it broadly, all things language. We talk about language, value, its purpose for humans, and much more. So, without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Emmanuel Keuleers. What? Dr. Keuleers. How do you pronounce your name? I never really understood how to say it.
It's pronounced Keuleers.
Keuleers. Okay.
Keuleers, yeah.
All right.
Typical Dutch vowel, which is very unusual in other languages.
Yeah, but you're Belgian, right?
Yeah, I have Belgian nationality. That's true.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So let's start from the like the from the ground up. So like, where are you from? Like, what did you study in school, etc.
Oh, so I was born in the city of Mechelen in Belgium. I also attended school there, and then I did a round of universities in Belgium. I studied psychology at the University of Brussels, and then at Ghent University, and then I did um, PhD at the University of Antwerp. And I moved to Antwerp there, and I still live in that city.
So you studied psychology first.
I studied psychology first, and I think like many psychology students, I uh, studied psychology to probably understand other people, and then quickly realized that the reason I studied psychology was to understand myself, and then realized at some point that it was a very difficult task, and so then I stopped studying clinical psychology and moved to experimental psychology, which is
Okay.
a much more exact field and is less mired in interpretation. Also, I think in general, for um, psychology, just in terms of if you want to do therapy or something, you
Mhm.
shouldn't study psychology when you come out of high school. You need some life experience for that. So I think people studying psychology to help others should be required to have decent life experience. Otherwise, they will just um, yeah, not understand other people.
I Yeah, I get what you mean. So you finished your entire psychology. Like, did you finish that path of your life, or did you just say I'm done with this and then move to some other
No,
like
absolutely not. I think that, I mean, so the theoretical and experimental psychology, which is what I studied, is very, very similar to what you would call cognitive science, right? So I first learned about neural networks when I was, for instance, studying um, studying in Ghent, doing my master, and became really interested in modeling, and so that's what I started to do, and I always had an interest in language as well, but my parents wouldn't let me study, or my parents. Well, they weren't very much in favor of me studying linguistics. So,
why is that? That
so
seems very specific.
in, I don't know. That's what I wanted to study, and then I didn't do that, but and I ended up doing psychology. But in the end, my PhD was in computational psycholinguistics. So that kind of combines all of my interests in psychology, and computer science, AI, and um, language. So yeah,
That sounds like something out of something out of like who wrote the Foundation series?
Asimov,
Uh,
Isaac Asimov.
Asimov, yes.
Yeah.
Computational
It's not
psycholinguistics.
psychohistory though.
It's not
It's
psychohistory,
psycholinguistics. Yeah.
but pretty close. So, did you always want to like be an academic, like when you were in school? Like, what was the thinking when you were back there?
No, absolutely. Well, there's two sides to this. This is like how you grow up. I think I grew up in an intellectually very stimulating environment. But I remember very well when we had these tests at school, orientation tests, that the things I would answer on those tests were things that I felt like I had a connection to. So I think I answered baker, cook.
Baker,
Yeah,
like making bread.
yeah. So baker, cook, engineering also. Engineer was something I would answer, and it's really interesting because what you see is that those whenever somebody would answer that, and these tests serve more, or in that time served more as a reason to put students who weren't performing well academically um,
Mhm.
in a career oriented direction instead of in a general direction. But I would have been, I think, happy being a baker or a cook, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of what I'm interested in, I would have applied there, because both of these things are very technical subjects which require a lot of precision, a lot of knowledge, and you can approach them. They're fascinating, right? So and I still remember that quite well. And at 11 years old, I said, "Yeah, why not? Baker, cook, that's or chef in a sense.
Yeah, no,
I
I
like to do
completely
that."
understand because I I'm learning to cook. I started learning to cook recently as a way of sort of staying in touch with my mom. So I would
Hmm.
just call her on Skype or something, and she would guide me through uh, like how to like making a recipe. And it's like a restaurant, right? So in the morning I'll call her. And it's like talking to the head chef, and then you plan out the menu. So I go to the market, and then
Hmm.
I'll like buy the stuff I need. So yeah, it's definitely technical. And like, okay, so you you said you wanted to be a cook. You know, like so okay. So when you were in school, were you always just like good with math and numbers and stuff, or how did you find that?
Well, I was in my I think in the foundational years. And afterwards I had a rebellious periods in which I wasn't really good at anything, except uh, if it could frustrate somebody, that I would be good at that. Uh, so I I was a self-driven learner. So
Right.
I remember I learned programming, I think, at 11, but we didn't have that at school at all, so I was in a situation which I would consider. Um, it's like a foundational story for me. So I had a Commodore 128, but my parents didn't have at that time uh, the money to buy a disk drive for it. So it was still on cassette. The only
Right.
problem I had was that my the heads of the cassette reader was misaligned, so I couldn't read any other programs that uh, other people would have written and given me. So I couldn't load any games. So I started writing things myself and trying things out. And I think that period of uh, having to program from a book, trying to figure things out without any outside help, taught me a lot of patience and perseverance in that respect. I think
Yeah.
that was very lucky, because if I would have been able to read all those programs and all those games, I would probably never have learned to program.
Like I can actually I can relate to that because I came into this whole thing similarly. But I mean, I had an engineering background, but when I came into AI, I hadn't done a whole lot of manipulating data or like writing like properly, just like writing hardcore software stuff. Because I spend most of my time with a with a oscilloscope and a breadboard and just like building
Nice.
stuff, right?
Nice.
So when I had to learn this, so when I first got interested, I had to basically piece together the knowledge that I needed online. And now, and that habit has come so handy now because like it's just like a second. It's just like second nature, right? Like like I can put together some code like without even having to know like right now I'm working on something and it's I need to use some Java, some R, some Python, but it's like what it's like a nature just to like okay go online, put the error message in somewhere and see what someone else did, take it, adapt it, fix your error, and then get it to work. Like it's pretty rewarding. But I don't know how I would how I would have done it without the internet. Like I don't know how you taught yourself to program without being able to go to Stack Overflow.
That's really interesting. Again, I mean, not having, I think if I would have had like all of those sources available, it would have probably gone faster. I would have quickly turned to another language than basic, for instance, because that's what you had. I mean, you switched on the machine, and the basically the basic interpreter was in the ROM, so that's what you got. And then there was a book with it, which said like, okay, this is a programming language, and here are some programs. And if you wanted to do something, you had to type over the entire program, and then I could save my own programs and read them again. Because I mean, the heads were misaligned, but that's like it's the same head that would read it and write it, so that was fine. Um, yeah. So. It, in isolation, and I wasn't, I think, a good programmer by any standard, but I think it's um, the knowledge that you need to um, persevere, and you'll figure out how it works uh, in the end,
Yeah.
without looking for outside help. I think that's a skill which you need to learn through experience.
Yeah, that's definitely something I noticed as being a TA for intro to programming. Like, uh, there's a certain lack of perseverance. It's like you try it, it doesn't work, and then it's like no, I'm done. It's like no, like you should like the number of times where I'll work like hours on end on a problem, trying to solve the code. Like when I was first starting to learn linked lists and double linked lists, that was not easy. Like it didn't come naturally to me at all, right? Because like your brain just doesn't. It's hard for your brain to work that way, especially if you're trying to traverse the list in recursively. It's like it's really difficult. And sometimes I just try it. I try for hours, never get it right. But then I go to sleep, and then I'll wake up in the morning, and then I'll have like an intuition, like, oh wait a minute, why can't I just do this? Because actually, most of the things happen when you're asleep, and that, so like you have to persevere long enough for it to matter, obviously. But you know, that's okay. So when did you how did the path go from psychology to ending up in AI? Like
Yeah.
what was the trajectory there?
That's interesting. So I did a postdoc in Ghent, where I studied for my master, and I was there for quite a long time. It's good to do a long postdoc at the really prolific uh, period of doing research, and I started to so my PhD was already on using machine learning to model aspects of psycholinguistics. And so I already did some machine learning there, so I was familiar with that. But then we started to work with a lot of what you would call behavioral big data. Um, when we started collecting or making online experiments where hundreds of thousands of people would participate and process those data. And I think in every aspect of my work there, this computational aspect and the AI methods started to emerge more and more. And so it was more and more in my interest, although I didn't study it. And then as it goes, while you're doing a postdoc, you start to apply here and there. Uh, and I applied here and there, came second quite a few times in things when I look at it in hindsight, I would probably not have been as happy as I am here. So
Mhm.
um, in the end, I ended up at Tilburg University, but in the Department of Communication and Information Sciences, because we were one big department. I was teaching psycholinguistics, but also text mining, so
Mhm.
more like NLP. And then when the bachelor started, the departments split, and I went to cognitive science and AI.
Nice. We definitely won out. We definitely came out on top on that deal. uh, uh, so, was that your like? Was that your first? What was your first teaching experience? Like, what did?
Oh,
Where did you start?
well, long ago when I was doing my PhD in Antwerp. So
Okay.
my supervisor uh, um, had I think, a prolonged illness, and he wasn't available to teach. So I volunteered. This is something I shouldn't have done, but I volunteered to take over his course, which was in yeah, psycholinguistics. And I think that was my first. I already taught workshops and smaller things, but in terms of academic teaching to students, undergraduate students, it was my first experience.
Nice.
And yeah, as it goes, like the very similar path to um, most other lecturers I talk to, is that it's really difficult in at the start. You worry a lot,
Mhm.
and I still worry a lot, but it's not paralyzing. So
Right.
I really enjoy teaching, and yeah, I think it's one of the nicer aspects of this job is when you're actually in front of the classroom. And, you can do you can explain something well, and sometimes you can't, and then you try to do it better next time. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Enough of this history stuff. I want to ask you some actual questions. Right.
Mm.
Okay. So, I want. I was curious about like the history of the history of the role of language in AI. Like,
Mhm.
what's the like? Just give me like I want to like I'm trying to understand sort of because it seems like it's a very important part of what we consider to be intelligent behavior, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, that's
And
like more.
what's the history in studying it in terms of AI?
Yeah. So I'm not sure what you're asking in terms of like cognitive science or AI.
No,
Uh,
because I asked that because like for example, I talked with Dr. Coglia, right? And her in her like her investigation to language and how what language is seems I can't put my finger on it, but like it seems a bit like bit different than from the approach, like eh, the the way you're approaching it, like
Mm,
from a very sort of computational
mhm.
linguistics perspective. Like, so I'm
Yeah,
trying to understand what the because she is more interested in like the neural activity and how like phonemes and stuff are perceived, etc.
yeah, yeah. So I think the reason why language is so important for AI is that it is probably the highest cognitive capacity that you can try to model. Language is very, very complicated, both
Yeah.
in its um, in the way it is acquired, in its importance uh, in the entire human ecosystem as a way of facilitating almost everything we do. Um, Also, sometimes making things much more difficult. Uh, but yeah, it's probably the highest order cognitive capacity, and that's why it has a kind of role in AI and cognitive science where people differentiate the things that you need to have language from other cognitive capacities. Let's say, for instance, image recognition. You could say, well, we can do image recognition pretty well using just representing the an image as a bunch of pixels. That's the retina, let's say, and having general learning mechanisms figure out what is what. Right. That kind of stuff works well for image recognition. And for a very long time, um, things like that didn't work well for language, and they really still don't. So you have this um, position, the Chomskyan position on what language is, where he says that language is a um, specific cognitive faculty which is different from all from general purpose cognitive faculties. And it's something genetic. It's something that we're born with, and it takes the form of an abstract um, universal grammar that's somewhere encoded into in our brain. Uh, so what that means is that it's seen as symbol manipulation,
Hmm.
meaning that it has very little to do with how we uh, actually observe the wetware. When you look at a brain, you don't see symbols anywhere.
Right.
You basically see neurons. Um, so there's a big debate, or there was a big debate about that, and there is still a very, very uh, strong division between linguists who adhere to that position and linguists who adhere to the position that language is just like another cognitive capacity, and you need the same things to explain it as you do learning. I don't know. Learning motor skills, for instance, or
Do
coordination,
I mean,
or vision.
is there a is there a theory as to where this universal grammar might come from? Like, how did we get it in the first place?
Oh yeah, I mean, there like many things. There's lots of theories about where language comes from, how it forms, and I think Chomsky really doesn't care. He um, basically says that it must exist for all kinds of um, I think what you would call phenomenological arguments, right? So when you look at language, you can see that this is, for instance, this sentence is grammatical and this sentence is not grammatical, and that approach is more or less taken to say, well, it can't be anything else but symbolic. I yeah, it's not that this is my position. I'm just trying to lay out
Right, right.
um, what it means. So you can read. It's pretty impenetrable, and but you can try to read something like syntactic structures, where these ideas are laid out. A really interesting thing that we also talk about in the program, or we did last year. I think you took that lecture when we discussed Chomsky. Was the relation between like the emergence of these Chomskyan theories and behaviorism, where it's really an explicit reaction to this Skinnerian behaviorism that explains all the cognitive uh, capacities that we have as stimulus response learning. So very much like what would we say, there's something going in the neural network and there's something coming out, and there's in between that it's just association, right? And what Chomsky did, to his credit, is showing that some aspects of language don't really lend themselves to the kind of explanations, behavioristic explanations that Skinner had uh, at that time.
Why do you think language evolved? Like, how come? Like, do you have any ideas, any
I
thoughts
think,
on?
my, yeah, my personal view is that um, it has to do with in a, I would say, transmitting value to each other. Like when what you're doing when you're using language usually is creating something of value. And I think that what my position in this is, and maybe it's where I differ from other people, is that language, human language, is not natural. It's not something natural. It's very often called natural language, but when you think of
Mhm.
it, it's actually quite technological. We would never have the language we have now without uh, that language having been written down, taught, uh, regularized throughout time, um, and really being subject to some kind of authority on how you should use that language, and how you shouldn't. So I think the language we use now is not entirely natural, and it is probably quite different from the proto languages, so to where language developed. And I think Chomsky would take the position that it's not, that that this is more or less the capacity for language which um, has emerged at some point, and from uh, that point onwards, it's the cognitive faculty itself that drives what language looks like. Whereas what I think is it's uh, by and large humans' interactions, and the effect of human networks on their communication tool that shapes uh, language, right? So if you
Right.
have there, that puts constraints on what language can be. You cannot have certain things, phenomena in language appearing, unless they are subject to um, certain constraints.
It's interesting that you sort of pointed out networks, right? Because I was thinking about recently the things that separate us from other animals, right? Because you know, yeah, like as similar as we are to a lot of animals, like especially the great apes, there's something about us that's very weird, right? Like we're very weird animals, And I was trying to think of things that separate us from other animals, and one of the things that struck me was the fact that is how much we depend on other human beings, right? And the like even to have this conversation, right, we are depending on hundreds of thousands of unknown human beings who like put together this computer, this mic, who are running the internet and the electricity and all these things, right, to make it happen. And it feels like a language is such a crucial part of that 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 thing which is so okay. So what do you think is like the crown jewel of human, of being a human? Like, I think language and communication is pretty up there as far as what we can accomplish.
I Yeah, I think what language allows us to do is to approach the real world with some distance. So there's a psychoanalytic theory, pretty impenetrable again by Jacques Lacan, which distinguishes, I think, between the real and the symbolic. And what I think language does in that respect is that it is the ability to connect with the world and with others in a way that we are not directly confronted with them, right? So uh, let's say that, for instance, you feel angry, right? The ability to uh, feel your anger and to have a word for it immediately creates a distance between you and the raw emotion, right? The
Mhm.
same thing with fear, for instance, but also with desire or love or anything that we experience as raw emotions. From the moment that we have words for it, we're able to work with those things from a distance, and we're
Mhm.
able to differentiate between them. And on the basis of having all of these words for these different things, we're able to create very, very uh, complex thoughts and reasoning systems, which we would not have if we wouldn't uh, have this filter of language, which represents parts of the world.
So to what degree do you think our mastery of a language, or let's say beyond mastery, let's say the richness of the language with which we are fluent, what to what degree, like, so what I'm trying to get at is that, like, even if, let's say I've been married to someone for 50 years, right, and I know this person like inside and out, the no matter what, how close we are, the only real way for that person to know what I'm feeling is for me to is for me to tell them, right? Or like for me like, or for them like, I'm thinking of how I can most readily share my state of consciousness with another person, right?
Uh,
And
it's
sorry,
interesting that
yeah,
you say that this is the only way. Obviously, it's not. There are non-linguistic ways of being with other people and of
right,
showing
of
things
course,
that.
yeah.
But I think what you're saying is exactly my point. Is that it's much easier when
Hmm.
you have words. That doesn't mean that the other thing is impossible or even something that should be avoided, but
Hmm.
it's much easier when you have those things. On the other hand, knowing uh, suddenly knowing a concept and having a word for it can seriously change your relationship with somebody.
Right, right,
Suddenly
right.
realizing that something you were unable to say for a very long time actually can be expressed in words. That's an interesting situation.
So like, so imagine a situation where the only way that you could express yourself is just to create some music or create some art,
Yeah.
or something great, like let's say, right? and and if you and most people are terrible at those things. Like they can't really create art, they can't really like write songs, let's say. Like I'll just here
Yeah.
just bear me out, just bear
Yeah.
with me, right? Like, but but language seems like a scalable solution, right? Anyone can sort of learn the words and try to match those words to their internal state and try to communicate that to another human being, right? So like I'm wondering, I'm trying to get like a grasp
Yeah,
this, right?
I see where you're going, but I don't agree completely,
Okay,
because
great, so
anybody
go
can
on.
sing a song, repeat a song, and everybody, playing an instrument, maybe something else, but we have the capacity to. Most people have the capacity to sing, to have rhythm. So I
Yeah,
don't agree that people are not able to make music. I think they do in the same way that they use language. And when we're talking about artistic creativity, if you want to do that well, either you're some kind of stimulus association genius who gets everything. I think that
mhm,
doesn't exist. And what you see as virtuosity is really people who know exactly what they're doing. So,
right.
for instance, if you look at jazz, right, and
Mhm.
uh, I think nobody plays jazz music proficiently unless they know exactly what they're doing, and so they know how to create. And what I the analogy to that in the use of language is, if you want to write something and you want to write well, that's not capacity that first of all exists without training,
Mhm.
without deep understanding of how to write, and without a lot of experience. So I think it is there are different levels of how to use language, and I think that at this very high level of creativity, the people who you they're not their virtuosity is not naive.
Right,
I
right.
think
So
it's studied.
for a while, I thought of language from a purely. I thought of it just as another, like a technological. Like I thought of language as a technology that we use, right? And like for example, so in Sri Lanka, um, we used to have this lady uh, who who worked for my mom, and she was really poor, and I went with her to her village one time, right? I mean, like I went to like we actually drove her like 5 hours to her village, like which is basically in a forest, and we had some and it was amazing. And then so I spoke to her grandchildren, right? Who were just being taught Sinhalese. Like they were just learning Sinhalese, like the native language, and nowhere else in the world is this language spoken. Like so, not on the internet, not anywhere, right? And so they were asking for some advice, like, okay, what advice would you give me, right? These are like, I don't know, like 8, 9-year-old kids, 10-year-old kids, no, maybe a little bit older than that, right? And I just told them, like, learn any other language. Like it doesn't matter what it is. Like it could be English, it could be Chinese, it doesn't matter. But like most of the internet, for example, is in English or in Chinese soon, or whatever. Like I just thought of it as a technology, but it's clearly more than that, it feels like, right? So where do you stand on the language thought idea? Like do you think the language you speak affects the way you think?
There's been a lot of research on that, and it's a very exciting field because we would like to believe that it is the case. Um, I think there may be some small effects. They're not going to be very large. So maybe
Okay.
that's good to reflect on. So psychology, and especially studies on language in psycholinguistics very often point out that they can find a difference here and there. And then when the popular press writes about it, it suddenly is interpreted as, well, the language you speak changes everything. Well, when you look at the statistics, the effects are very, very small and are probably not
Mhm.
there for all of the subjects they tested. So yeah, I'm very skeptical of the not theoretical relevance of that kind of research, but of the implications that people make of it. I think by and large, uh, you don't have huge differences in how people think, uh, that you can only and uniquely relate to the language they speak.
Right. The reason I brought that like up is because there's like a real practical implication for somewhere from where I'm from. Because as far as some Sri Lankans are concerned, I am a foreign devil, right? Because I speak the language so well, I must obviously not have Sri Lankan values or Sinhalese values. Like this is like real life, right? Like I'm telling you
Yeah.
from experience. And there's also a lot of like political um, pushback in sort of like doing something simple as giving kids free access to internet,
Hmm.
because they're like, no, if they forget their natural language, their mother tongue or whatever it is, they will stop valuing and stop thinking like Sri Lankans. And so like that's a real, I mean, how do you like, I don't know what to do in this situation, right? It's like, okay, well,
Yeah, but this is, I think, different because what you're saying there is like, language connects you to culture. Uh,
difficulties. Technical difficulties, I meant. So we were just talking about language and how it gives access to culture, right? And you were gonna say something, but
yeah,
I
I
guess
think that, I mean,
maybe.
you were talking about how there are political motivations for, I think, the authorities in Sri Lanka to um, only have children speaking Sinhalese. Is that it?
Mhm. That's it. Yeah.
And obviously, yes, if you uh, access gives you so language gives you access to specific networks and specific um, information. It also can take it away. So if you don't know certain um, language, you're also not able to participate in certain networks and find out
Yeah.
particular information. And this, in terms of social linguistics, this goes beyond language itself, but also in the way you use language, because then it's about how language becomes a status symbol, and how you may
Oh
pronounce
yeah, for sure.
your consonants in a particular way. It tells people if you're
Mhm.
the in group or the out group.
That's pretty funny. Like actually, like it's so funny you should mention that, because for sure I know like speaking English is like is a bit of a status symbol where I'm from. Like even if you can't speak it properly, people will try to like speak broken English just to. I know my mom does it sometimes. It's pretty funny, but like it's a because like from a technology point of view, it kind of makes sense, right? Like if you want to limit people from having access to all these different ideas, like I guess it's not the language itself that causes the problem. It's the fact that having the language gives you access to new ideas, right? Like if you can't read English at all, your the amount of utility you can derive from the internet is minimal, unless you're in China or
Yeah,
Chinese,
and
if you
I
don't
think, I
if you
mean,
don't use.
with machine translation, if you have a good language pair, that's great. Also, I have to say, I mean, that
Mm.
there are certain languages which have a lot of speakers which are typically not very proficient in English because the language community is quite monolithic, and that's the case for German, Italian, French. I mean, this is changing, but for a very long time, yeah, I think that the typical German or Italian would only speak German or Italian, but there's also an enormous amount of information available in those languages.
So, okay, do you think about general artificial intelligence? Like, is that something you are even like? How much does that work in your mind
N-
at all?
Not uh, not the slightest, really. I think it's to me at this point, yeah, I think that's you know sociological science fiction. It's interesting to discuss it, but more from a sociological point of view. I think it tells us a lot about the fears that we have as a uh, as humans, as a society, um, and what you can't avoid is that humanity always goes through uh, radical transformations. And I think that the transformation of language itself and the profound effect it has on humanity may be more important than uh, artificial intelligence could ever be. But also, the industrial revolution has like profoundly changed our relation um, with the world and with each other.
Yeah, like I asked because I would think in that endeavor, like having. So, do you think an AI? Suppose we didn't really explicitly think about language for this AI. Do you think it would just simultaneously, just like just it would just come up with it on its own as something that it
But
needs?
why?
I mean, why did we come up with it?
Because
Why do we have it?
because for us there's value in doing that thing using uh, efficient communication systems is of profound value to human society and human interactions. So every time we
Mm.
are able to uh, exchange things, it helps us a lot to do that. It's in that sense it's not very different from an efficient commercial transaction. It's like, I want this, okay, I'll give you this. We're done. You give me this, and this ability to understand each other through a common shared code is extremely beneficial to humans. You could say that um, computers have code uh, if they
Mm.
want to if they would want to express things. But what is of value to um, a computer or an AI program is not clear to me. And so without a clear idea of what would constitute value, um, I don't see how.
So you think so basically so like so you think our we got language because of just the clear like survival reproductive benefits or value of
No,
being able to
no,
communicate, or what, like why do you think it was
it's just
valuable?
incredibly efficient.
Hmm.
It's
So yeah, so like what what do we derive the value from, like the value of share being able to efficiently communicate like. So the way I think about it is this, right? The way I think about it is that I think um, my obviously I don't know anything about language. I don't know anything about anything, right? But uh, like my conception is that we have an experience of reality that is sufficiently different from everyone else's experience of reality that we needed some way to bridge that gap.
Uh,
And
okay. Yeah.
and so we sort of like it like out of that necessity, I feel like we the- I don't know
Mhm,
why that was
mhm.
just necessary, but I think we sort of evolved like language just proved to be such a powerful tool to solving that problem. Like even if even if let's say you and I are in the exact same lecture hall watching the exact same person, like our experience of reality is highly correlated, right? Like we experience the gravity for this the same way, let's say. We experience thermodynamics the same way. We may even experience what we're seeing the same way, but we aren't exactly new. It's only a close correlation, right? Like, for example, if you have something going on at home, like that's distracting you, your experience of the lecture is completely different from my experience of the lecture, right? Even though even the things in the lecture that you might be particularly interested in was things that
Mhm.
I'm not things that I'm interested in could be very different, right? So like it seems to me there's some need to bridge that gap that gave rise to something like language, even if it isn't exactly language. But uh,
I think I mean,
so
I see what you're saying, but it's I would say that like how are you going to do anything efficiently with another person uh, without being without having conventions on
right,
how
okay,
to do
so
that, and those conventions are language. Imagine organizing any kind of society without language. It
Mhm.
doesn't work.
it
Imagine
would be
having
it doesn't work.
to be a hunter gatherer who relies on other people uh, to uh, uh, to collect food, or organize something as a team. It doesn't work if there aren't shared conventions, and those shared conventions
Mhm.
about what is what our language, and we have a mutual um, benefits in adhering to those codes. And the really interesting thing is that you start understanding how important that mutual adherence to those codes is from the moment somebody doesn't do it. It's incredibly frustrating.
Right, exactly.
And so this is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
pragmatics, where the breaching of something uh, really shows you that the adherence to it is so strong, because it almost never occurs. The adherence to it is proved by um, proves that it is important. And I can repeat the same point I made again and again and again, and it will be very frustrating, because the convention is that we don't do that. We don't repeat
Mhm.
the previous sentence again.
Right, right, right.
There is a limit, to people
Right,
will
right.
not accept that. And in
So
yeah,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah. No, go
so
ahead.
those are Grice's maxims, and that's it's interesting to read those, because it's not something that is clear cut, but it gives you a very clear view on what people adhere to, and what they expect from others when they use language.
Like I think, that idea goes beyond language, right? Like if we, so like when you walk into a lecture hall, all the seats are facing one direction, right? And the board is facing the other
Hmm.
direction. And if I sit now, like everyone's sitting in and facing one direction, but if I sat down and faced the opposite direction, right? And people in there would be visibly disturbed. They'd be like, what, like what is
They
happening?
would be disturbed, but you're not affecting the value of the thing. It's like your thing. If you're not needed in that lecture, nobody cares. But if I use language in a way that decreases your value, you don't like it because you feel like you're cheated on the transaction.
Can you give me an example? Like what do you mean?
Well, if I would say, well, I'm a Dutch speaker,
Yeah.
and I find it easy to come up with all kinds of words in Dutch, and I'm gonna have this interview with you and use all kinds of words that you don't understand. You don't like that. Or
Mhm.
if I would talk very softly to you
Yeah.
in a way that you wouldn't understand, or I would not be to the point. I would start talking about something
Mhm.
completely different. All of those things are, you know, ways in which when you do that, people feel cheated. And I'm not
Right, right, right.
I'm not a student of pragmatics myself, but I think one of the most powerful examples that an ex-colleague gave to me of this kind of breaching was that, as an illustration, you're sitting at a dinner table, right? And somebody's asking you a question, but you have your mouth full of food. What do? You can point to your mouth and
Um,
say,
yes.
I'm going to finish this, right? And then the expectation is that afterwards you're going to give your answer. The expectation is not that you're going to take another mouthful of food, right? So
Yeah.
these things occur so infrequently, these like grave violations of these conventions, uh, and that makes it clear that what we're doing is very very regulated,
Mm,
and it has to do with value, and that
I see.
everybody agrees more or less that uh, this is an exchange, which is um, there's strict rules about what you can do and what you can't.
So, okay. Okay, so the reason I brought up this, like, okay, so there's a nice, like, this is all going to connect, in a weird way. But like, the reason I brought up that is like the idea of like what I thought to be of having different experiences is that, and you said that the computers wouldn't really need to evolve language, right? They wouldn't even like an AGI might not come up with language on its
What's
own.
the value? That's
Um,
really my question.
right. So my question is, so like, so okay, fine. So let's take NumPy, okay, right? Okay, let's say like is NumPy conscious, right? Like, is NumPy capable of having a unique experience that is like a NumPy on your computer? Is it capable of having a unique experience from a NumPy on some other computer, right? So like such that they would have to come up with a way to be able to communicate that would require them to come up with something that looks like
I'm not going to
language.
answer that question, and I think that the reason is simple. It would take me a very long time. I would need to think about
Yeah,
it, and the way I would think about it is
yeah.
in terms of Wittgenstein's language games, and basically,
I don't know what that is.
no, I think that the problem there when we ask the question, right? Um, the question is ill defined because the terms are ill defined, and
Right.
when we start analyzing the terms of the question, very often the problem becomes a way because it's shown that the question as it is unanswerable, or
Right. Right. Right.
or doesn't make a lot of sense. And so that was Wittgenstein's approach to some of these metaphysical questions, was to rigorously decompose them until nothing's left of them. And you see, well,
Mhm.
there's not really anything there to be answered, or it's trivial. So I
Right. Right.
tend to think of these metaphysical kind of questions about consciousness as well. We already find it extremely hard to say to 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 define what we mean by consciousness. It's incredibly difficult, and you could say, yeah, that's because consciousness is uh, is a very difficult thing to define, but it's circular, right? And then you would say,
Right,
so
right, yeah,
why
yeah, yeah.
wouldn't you use something that you can actually define? Because that's the subject worth
Mhm.
investigating. What you can't define by definition is not something you can investigate well.
Right. Okay, so like, no, I'll be honest. Before I came to this program, I didn't give language a second thought. I didn't think about it at all. Like I was like, because it just felt so obvious. Like it just felt so natural, so normal, so natural. I always thought of it as already solved. Like everyone pretty much knows everything there is to know about language. Like all done. But interacting with you and Peter and Paula, I was like, okay, well, this is pretty weird. This entire thing that we do call speak call language is quite strange, and no one seems to really know where it came from. But it's pretty nice that we have it, right? Like it's quite incredible. Like it, because like you said, we derive so much like value from being able to just. So okay, hold on. But we also talk to ourselves, or maybe it's just me. I don't know. Like we use language internally as well, right?
And
So
you
it's
use the
not just
same
about.
conventional language. Isn't that amazing? You don't have like
Yeah, it's
your
true. Yeah.
individual language. Hey, this is a more efficient language for me to talk to myself. No, you use the conventions because
Yeah.
it's like a self-organizing system. The things you use in the conventions have a reason to be efficient, and so yeah, that's
Mhm.
the why would you go through the trouble? You couldn't come up with a unless it being for a very very specific domain that is not
Like,
well
I mean,
established.
even in my dreams, my language follows the same rules, right? Even in my
Yeah,
dreams, like when I have never once dreamed in gibberish. Like it's always like
true.
it always follows the same. Even the people in my dreams follow those conventions. I've had dreams where it's like multiple people talking to each other, but they still follow the same exact rules of language, which is weird, right? And why would that be the
Yeah,
case?
yeah, yeah. I think what's nice is like the our mind's capacity to switch off certain things and then still come up with um, yeah, like a generation of these hallucinations that dreams are. I
Mhm.
find it absolutely fabulous. I dream that I'm reading uh, sometimes, and then the text appears before my eyes,
Mhm.
and I'm reading it while I'm dreaming. So
Mhm.
I think that's an amazing feat because your brain has to generate what's on the page uh, at that point, and you have to believe that you're reading it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I think that's funny.
Like, okay, so I'll ask you some. I want to ask you some big questions before I let go. I mean, thank
Mhm.
you so much for your time. Like, you've been very generous right now, in indulging me. Okay, so then, what do you think? What do you think we are doing here? Like, as human beings, I mean, like, what's this whole thing about? Because I find it quite ridiculous. Like, I find this entire thing pretty ridiculous. Like, the entire everything.
Life.
What do you think? Life itself. Like, I find it like I'll tell you what I think in a bit. But like, what do you think? What do you think we're here? Like, why do you think this is?
Um, I find that when you observe your own moments of darkness, right, and
Mhm.
you ask yourself in those times, uh, why does it all matter? It strikes me, at least in my case, that when you're doing something else, you don't think about it, right? It's only when you give it explicit attention, and then when you're doing something,
Yeah.
it goes away. So I think the choice is then either to spend your life on the existential questions, and you have to be very
Mhm.
careful, because from the moment you pay attention to anything else, those questions go away. And
Yeah.
so I believe in the value of the practical,
Mhm.
and that our experience of ourselves being as it is, one way in which we can avoid pain and
Yeah.
suffering is by doing, by acting. And if you cannot find anything valuable in uh, in acting for yourself, perhaps you can find value in acting for others. So
Yeah, for sure. Like,
again, I think that um, the question why is loses relevance from the moment that we do something, because generally it goes to the background, and the
yeah, yeah,
doing things now, acting, it takes the foreground. So I'm not dismissing the question, only I think that the practical thing to do is uh, to act.
I agree. That's great. I mean, that's like I couldn't think of a that's a pretty good. I mean, it's like that answer strikes me as true. Like like because I experienced that in my life, right? When I start thinking about these things, like what my thought now is like, you know what? I'm just gonna sit down and try to write some code. Like that, like that sort of calms me down. You know, like like it's weird. Um, like it's there's a stabilizing force in meaningful work. You know, it makes it really is sort of like a counterbalance to a void of just existence, like just without any with no reason at all. You know, for sure, I definitely agree with that. And okay, so I have one more question. So like, two more questions actually. So one first question is like, what kind of future do you think is a future that's worth running, really like running like hell towards, like for you, I mean, it could be for your family, it could be for you, could be for like the world in general, but something that's worth running towards, and like a future for for the world that we should run away from,
Yeah,
like
I think that
it,
something that I find missing in my life as an atheist is ritual,
Mhm.
and I think I when we become very scientific, um, rational, methodic, not rational, but methodic thinkers, we often lose sight that we also need uh, aesthetics and beauty and ritual uh, in our life. Uh, One of the things that I find incredibly uh, perhaps frustrating is that as an atheist, when I go to a funeral, um, there are very few rituals. There are very few things that we have in common to deal with difficult transitions of life, but also to celebrate transitions in life. So I would run to a future where those kind of shared aesthetic experiences that help us with marking uh, uh, important points in our life are reintroduced, and shared between people. I think that's incredibly important, and I would run away from the um, commercialization of individual experience. I think that's sad. Um, it's transitory and yeah, useless. So that's
That's, I mean, I feel like we could talk 2 hours just on those last two responses. That's like, I completely, uh, like agree. Like, definitely the case. Like, especially with what you said about, like, even though, like, because I was sort of, I was like, in terms of being an atheist, like, so I was raised a Buddhist, right? My family. But then I went to an international school, and then I studied around the world. I was around people who were of different religions. So I sort of um, like in the act of amalgamating a bunch of different religions, I've sort of like ended up being like an atheist, because like I have all these different ideas in my head, right? And I completely agree with you with the idea of tradition and sort of rituals that we need to take part in these. One example I can think of is, like, for example, in psychedelic use, right? Like modern society, like the Netherlands, let's say, we don't have good rituals around the use of these plants, right? Whereas more like older cultures, like, from the Native Americans, or South America, they have rituals and like sort of community ideas behind these things, right? So like even those things are problematic, because like you can't just come home from work on a Wednesday and eat a bunch of mushrooms. Like that's never gonna like and then go back to work the next day. Like it's hard, right? You need to have some sort of like community and ritual to behind it. But yeah, I definitely yeah, that was great. Um, anyways, uh, thank you so much for your time. We should definitely sit down again, and yeah, like, we have a lot to to talk about. So I'll definitely bug you again to have another conversation with me. I hope you had much fun as I did. That was great.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. So thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much. And okay, I'll see you around. So, all right, bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me in this conversation. I hope you got something out of it. And until next time.